Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining Birds Georgia and our guest speaker tonight. We had really good turn up today, like signups. I don't know. Everyone's really interested in keeping wild birds healthy, Nicole. So let's see if you teach them a thing or two. So tonight we are hosting Nicole Kemon. She is a research assistant at the Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Georgia. And tonight she's going to discuss her research exploring the intersection of human behavior and wildlife health. So, whether you're a bird enthusiast, just a casual bird feeder person, or maybe you're a diehard birder, wherever you are on the spectrum, I think Nicole's talk will be of great interest to you guys. And just for anyone who needs the recording or maybe couldn't join us tonight, we will be sharing a recording of this talk with you shortly after. Give us a day or two to get the recording together, and we'll send that out to everyone who has registered. Nicole will be discussing her research, and then at the end, we'll allot some time for Q&A. You have the option down at the bottom of your screens to drop some questions as we're going along. So feel free to drop them in there as they come to you or in the chat, wherever works best for you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Nicole.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Melissa. And thank you, everybody, for attending today. I was super looking forward to speaking tonight. You guys are awesome. I love Birds, Georgia. And it was a really great, one of my first communities coming into Athens, Georgia area that really taught me the love of birds. So thank you for that. This is kind of the overview of my presentation. I'm going to give a brief introduction. I'm going to talk about some past research that's already been done in my field of research. And then I'm going to talk about the interviews, some of the findings that I found in 2024. And then I just closed out a national survey this year, and I'm still analyzing the data, but I have some preliminary findings that I wanted to share with you. And then there's going to be time for questions at the end. So just a little bit about me. I am a 2023 Appalachian Trail through hiker. I'm a Virginia native as well. I am doing my master's at UGA's Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources. And on the bottom left here is a photo of other people that are not currently in my lab, but work with me on the same Georgia DNR grant for this project. We have Nikki Castleberry, Kimberly, as well as Sarah and Rocky Francisco in that picture. And then the top right is my boss, my PI, which stands for Principal Investigator for those not in academia. So she's basically helping me do the best research that I can. She's currently in Australia right now, so she couldn't attend today. But these are me with some birds from mist netting that I did earlier last year. My personal spark bird is the white ibis. It has a soft spot for me. The reason I got into birds was I did an internship at the Everglades National Park in southern Florida. I was part of a diversity internship called Fish and Feathers from Environment of the Americas, and I basically got to work with interpretation park rangers to create programs not only for the tourists that visited the park, but for the locals in the area as well too. And that was really fun. I got to work with the Tropical Audubon Society in Florida, who was an alumni from my undergrad, which was really awesome. And I got to work with other interns as well to teach not only little kids, but adults about fishing, birding, and how to be good stewards of the environment. I wanted to make this a little bit interactive. So if you guys have your phones or you can log on onto Google, the web browser, there's a code up here that you can use, or you can scan with the camera app on your phone. I wanted to ask you guys how bird feeding makes you feel, and all your responses will pop up on this screen so we can all see everybody's words. So feel free to go ahead and write some words down if you're able. I was interested in hearing what other people thought. So we got fun, excited, and happy right now. The bigger the word, the more people wrote that same word down. So it seems like a lot of people feel happiness when they bird feed. Sometimes frustrated. That's funny. We'll give people a few more seconds to add some words in. But these are awesome. I love that everybody has such positive emotions when bird feeding. That's great. We got curious, relaxed, fun, joyful, connected to nature, sometimes frustrated because I assume of the silly squirrels. Useful. Great. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for participating. That makes me really happy. I know that sometimes using technology during presentations is a little hard, but I love that you guys are able to put so many emotions inside the slide. To go on to the next one. So, as you guys probably already know, because most of you all have multiple bird feeders and are avid birders, from my personal experience speaking with others and other studies, I have found that we all share many similar motivations and values for bird feeding. And it's backed by lots of previous studies too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some previous studies about bird feeding. From speaking with others, I've learned that bird feeding was a source of entertainment for others, and it's an accessible way to connect with nature, especially for the elderly population. I spoke with quite a few people from nursing homes. And those who have physical disabilities that are unable to take long walks outside are able to enjoy nature right outside their windows. So connection to nature through bird feeding is super important to certain groups of people. And then there's also entertainment, of course. Individuals take pleasure in observing bird behavior, bird song, attracting specific or rare species. I know everybody wants to try to get that Baltimore Oriole at their backyards, and everyone always loves seeing the colorful birds, especially during breeding season. Bird feeding also allows people to enjoy this activity with others, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. There was one study that said that bird feeding increased a lot during the pandemic, which makes sense because it's a great way to enjoy nature in the enclosure of your home. Many people actively encouraged others to partake in bird feeding and felt a sense of belonging within the bird feeding community. I think it's really amazing because even though we have bird feeders in our backyard, people are texting each other like, "Oh, look at this bird that I saw," or they're sharing photos on Facebook. So I do feel like it is a very social activity, even though we tend to do it individually. And some individuals believe that feeding to be especially helpful to birds during migrations in winter when food is scarce or when it's really, really cold outside. And of course, we have to think about mental and physical health. There are so many studies highlighting bird feeding's positive impact on not only their mental well being, but their mood as well. And it's an excuse to enjoy the outdoors and look at birds. Just to give you a bit background about the popularity of bird feeding, in the US alone, 91.1 million people enjoy bird watching around their homes, and over 57 million households feed birds. And those are old statistics from 2018. It's a huge economic industry as well, with over 4 billion spent annually just on bird feed alone in the US. However, the bad news is that bird feeding can inadvertently increase pathogen transmission, which can cause both avian and zoonotic diseases. Pathogen transmission is found to be higher in areas with a bird feeder than in areas without bird feeders, according to Wilcox and et al., which did a study in 2015. Examples of diseases that can be spread from bird feeders include avian pox, avian flu, salmonellosis, and E. coli, just to name some of the big ones. It is recommended that we disinfect our bird feeders to mitigate these disease risks for birds and people. The CDC and Georgia Department of Natural Resources recommends people to use warm soapy water with their bird feeders, scrubbing the debris, the fecal matter, and the old seed off with scrubbers, and then using a 10% bleach solution for at least 10 minutes, rinsing it with water again and allowing it to dry fully before refilling with seed. And it is recommended that people do that bi-weekly for solid food, such as like millet or peanuts and things like that. But for hummingbird feeders, even more frequently because it's a liquid feeder. Sorry, did it change? Okay, yes, it did. There is a missing feedback loop. Few individuals disinfect feeders correctly and regularly. So a study in 2013 by Horn and Johansson found that 40% of people who feed birds in the US and Canada only clean their feeders once a year, if at all. So people are not cleaning their feeders regularly, and they seem to have an incomplete understanding of the importance of disinfecting feeders and may not recognize the disease risks associated with bird feeding. Dayer et al. She has a lab in Virginia Tech, and she does a lot with bird feeding. You should go look at her research sometime. But in 2019, she found that only 6% of people who fed birds believed their actions increased disease prevalence. Therefore, in response to increasing concerns over avian zoonotic disease transmission, we need to understand the socio-psychological factors that influence their behaviors in people, because we all know that providing people information is not an effective way to change their behaviors. We need to go a step deeper. And with certain places in the US, like local areas and neighborhoods, and even some countries implemented restrictions or bans on bird feeding. And that's the last thing that we want to do, right? So if we can mitigate disease risks and get people on board on that, we can still continue to have bird feeders in the US. So the purpose of my study, here are a list of my objectives. The main purpose is how can we encourage people to adopt proper disease prevention behaviors while feeding birds? And we're going to do this by investigating people's motivations for feeding birds and their perceptions of disease risks from bird feeding, and identify any constraints to the regular disinfection of bird feeders. And we're going to use that information to propose strategies and send it to not only Georgia DNR, but other environmental organizations as well, to encourage people to adopt these disease prevention behaviors. I want to start off with explaining what human dimensions are. This is kind of the work that I do. I'm not going out and tagging all these birds or misnetting and, using a little Q-tip to see how if they are diseased and look at their pathogen transmission. I work more on the human side, so I usually am just talking to people for the majority of my work. So human dimensions at a baseline is that humans, wildlife, and nature are all interconnected. Therefore, how we understand and interact with the natural world influences how we use environmental resources. So we need to consider how different groups of people perceive and react to environmental problems to develop more stronger and effective conservation and sustainability management plans, which is a fancy way of saying people don't want to do things if it doesn't make sense to them or align with their belief systems. So different groups of people have different belief systems, and we need to meet them halfway. Agencies and organizations need to meet them halfway to identify what's important to them as individuals and incorporate them into solutions to environmental problems. These next few slides are going to be a little bit kind of like a background of past research that I looked at before conducting my interviews. We're going to start off with the cognitive hierarchy. It's a theoretical framework for organizing cognitive functions. So within this framework, values serve as the central foundation for higher order cognitive processes, such as beliefs, attitudes, norms, intentions, and behaviors. So um, at the very bottom, basic beliefs connect foundational values to the higher orders, and norms are guidelines on how people think they should act and reinforce expectations of those guidelines on themselves and others. A simple example is that when you go into somebody's house, do you leave your shoes on or take them off? That's an example of what a norm would be. And then attitudes are the assessments of like objects in a negative or positive light based on the individual's own experiences of specific events associated with those objects. So people assess objects based on how they believe the object will support or threaten their values. So the majority of the people, as just an example, when they see a snake, they tend to have a negative attitude towards snake. But somebody who's a herpetologist or loves reptiles, they might have positive feelings and attitudes towards them. So it aligns with their values in different ways, and emotions come out of that because of their attitudes. Intentions are plans to take, are plans people take to complete prior to taking action. And this upside down triangle makes it sound like people have like an intention to do something, but sometimes it's subconscious, right? We don't really take a step necessarily to intend to behave a certain way. So it's just understanding that there are intentions before behaviors. Um, Values are characterized, they're the very foundation of this triangle, are characterized as few, broad, and commonly developed at a young age. So they're very stable and they're very difficult to change. So that means that large groups of people tend to share the same values because they are the most basic form of cognition. So it's not really the best way to explain people's variation in behaviors. Higher order cognition, so meaning as we go up the triangle to the top, are more specific to individuals, situations, experiences, and events. And they tend to be more fluid than values. So, therefore, attitudes, norms, and intentions are more specific to individuals and are less abstract. So we believe that there are many types of people who are driven by different beliefs, attitudes, norms, and intentions to bird feed. And in human dimensions, we seek to understand these drivers of behaviors to appeal to not only one type of audience, but multiple within the bird feeding community. And we want to implement those when we're promoting disease prevention behaviors and creating strategies like messaging strategies. Um, Two other concepts I do want to bring up. So the one on the left, you'll see a square that says mutualism and utilitarian with lows and highs. This visual is called wildlife value orientations, and it's a set of beliefs by Fulton et al. In 1996. So this is an old research paper, but value orientations are a set of beliefs used to categorize expressions of values. So, wildlife orientations are determinants of attitudes related to wildlife and shed light on the intentions for behaviors that affect wildlife. So, there's two main wildlife value orientations, utilitarian and mutualism. So, people with utilitarian are, think of your hunters and fishers, anglers. They view wildlife as a resource, and humans have the right to manage and use wildlife for their benefit. But mutualism is different because they seek to not use wildlife, but coexist with wildlife in an equal relationship where humans and wildlife share the same kinds of rights. And people with mutualism tend to seek an emotional connection and amity with animals. So the important lies in identifying which value orientations of people who bird feed to create narratives for messaging strategies that appeal to the biggest group of people within the feeding community. Um, so as you can probably imagine, most people who bird feed are going to be more mutualist, but might have slight utilitarian values depending on who they are and in the individual. On the right hand side is the Schwartz theory of basic values. And these are like 10 values that guide action. And they're shared across all cultures worldwide, which is really cool how they can make it in such a small figure for all these values. So, Schwartz theorized that these values share related motivations, and the closer the values are located to one another in the circle, the more similar their motivations will be. So, for example, we can look at the bottom right where there's security. Security is going to be similar in tradition and conformity than on the other side of the circle where there's self-direction stimulation. People who have security, conformity, and traditional values are more conservative and they tend to be motivated by conservation, if that makes sense, to put an example in there. People can have conflicting values. You can look at this and look at it and be like, oh, I have a lot of these values, but people can have conflicting values and only one value can dominate at one situation or event. And therefore, that highlighting number one prioritized value can be pursued in each action at a time. There was past research done saying that homeowners who do wildscape gardening and add like wildlife features to attract wildlife, such as bird baths, feeders, and nest boxes, they showed that they value things like aesthetic beauty, personal enjoyment, and interaction with wildlife. And that can translate into this circle of Schwartz values. The last but not least, the VBN theory. VBN stands for value, belief, norm. It links values, beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors through the activation of personal norms. And values defined by Schwartz can be simplified into four groups. So that circle that we saw earlier in the previous slide can be further sectioned off into altruistic, egotistic, and traditional, and openness to change. So altruistic is supporting the care for others. Egoistic is prioritizing personal benefit and gain. Hedonistic, which is sometimes paired with traditional, depending on which figure comes up on the internet. It's the pursuit of self-indulgence and seeking pleasure for oneself. And we want to also add in biospheric, which is the value supporting the stewardship of all species in the biosphere. This theory, Stern theorized that individuals develop beliefs about environmental consequences based on the information they accept as relevant and true to their values. And these values and beliefs are activated when people are aware of the consequences actions have on environmental issues to create an ascription of responsibility to perform a behavior. And then people from the awareness of consequences, they get an awareness of consequences and then they activate an ascription to responsibility to react because they are aware of the consequences. For instance, to give an example with bird feeding, if people see a sick bird, they become aware of the consequences of bird feeding. And the ascription of responsibility is that they feel obligated to clean their feeders as a reaction to understanding the consequences. From that, you create your own personal norm, which is a personal standard that you hold to yourself to keep doing this responsible behavior. And then that goes into examples like environmental citizenship, environmental activism, or in our case, cleaning their bird feeders. So now I'm going to talk about what I did in 2024, the interviews. I used value belief norm theory to create my own theoretical framework when creating questions for the interviews. So as you can see, I put values, beliefs, and knowledge, such as disease knowledge, how to clean a bird feeder, into awareness of consequences that will lead to ascription of responsibility. I did want to include emotion as well because emotion is a huge driver to seeing sick birds, for instance, motivating people to clean their bird feeders. And I also included social and personal norms. We did talk about personal norms earlier, but didn't really talk about social norms. Social norms is seeing other people do something and then you feeling obligated to follow suit. So I don't know if you've ever seen somebody pick up a piece of litter on the floor and then you felt obligated to pick up a piece of litter as well because other people did it. So that would be an example of a social norm. And then later on, I'm going to talk more in depth about choice architecture and how that influences behavioral intention. And then all of these things will influence disease prevention behaviors. So from May to July 2024, I conducted 53 in-depth, semi-structured interviews with people who actively fed birds in Georgia over the age of 18, and they had to have had bird feeders on their property. I asked them open-ended questions about their reasons for feeding birds, feeding habits, their knowledges of pathogens that may be transmitted at bird feeders, their perceptions of disease risks, and any sources of information they used related to birds and bird feeding. And I transcribed these interviews. Some of them were in person, some of them were over Zoom. So I transcribed them using Zoom software, and then I went to use NVivo and did 2 rounds of deductive coding and then a abductive analysis after to integrate findings with existing studies during my final coding phase. Um, a lot of you, I did interview. I was looking at the attendee list earlier before I started speaking, and I saw a lot of familiar names. You guys might have seen my flyer circling around. This is what I used to recruit participants at. I did want to explain what deductive coding was. So I don't know if you guys remember, but in elementary school, high school, and middle school, I always had to annotate in my English classes, and I absolutely hated it. It's when you had to circle and write little notes inside your books to make sure that you're actually understanding the content of what's being said. Sometimes you would have to like mark, oh, this is onomatopoeia, or this is a motif, and or this is a great example of symbolism in the book, yada, 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 correct? So that is the most similar thing to what I can describe to what deductive coding is. So I'm looking at these transcriptions and I'm highlighting sections on NVivo software to find similar themes and patterns amongst all of the transcriptions. And then you kind of end up with highlighting similar things. And when it's under a similar theme, you call it a code. This code can be named a simple word to explain what those highlighted sections are. I used kind of the English example in the middle of the presentation slide. So I would highlight and label things different colors and say, oh, this is about people's perception of disease risk. And this is positive emotions associated with bird feeding, negative emotions associated with bird feeding. And I would keep creating codes until I went through all the transcriptions. And then I did a second round of coding to refine the code book and clarify the definitions and themes of those code books. So we reorganized existing codes and added new codes to encompass what people were saying about their behaviors, motivations, and perceptions of bird feeding and diseases. So it's a very much an iterative process. It's very fluid, and certain codes might not show up again in later transcriptions. And we decide it's not important for the looking at the transcriptions as a whole in all the interviews. So sometimes we would create new ones, delete old ones, so on and so forth. Abductive analysis is basically just using what you have learned from previous research and other studies and applying it to your own research and see how it contradicts or is similar, and putting all the parts together basically. Abductive analysis is a very fancy word for just summarizing everything that you have learned and putting it into something that is cohesive. So it is also an iterative creative process. It's reflexive and it allows researchers to construct narratives that interpret patterns and account for contradictions within the qualitative data. So it's to like integrate the observations that we were seeing and comparing it to previous studies as well. So with the results, we found consistencies across interviewees' responses and created a typology that we categorized individuals based on their similarities. So we were reading people's papers and we're like, wow, a lot of people are saying a lot of the similar stuff. And so we categorized and made groups called the enthusiastic, well-intentioned, and self-interested feeder. And based on those groups, people shared a lot of the similarities in perceiving bird feeding and disease risks. Before I delve into each group and describing the characteristics of each one, I did want to say that we found four main motivations across the enthusiastic, well intentioned, and self interested feeders. So they had four main motivations for bird feeding, which was one, to support the welfare of wild birds, two, to engage in wildlife conservation and environmental stewardship, three, for personal pleasure, and then four, as a means of social engagement within a community. So I know at the beginning of this presentation, I talked about why people bird feed and how they feel. These were the four main points based on the interviews I found as motivations for bird feedings. And while research participants highlighted that bird feeding enhances their mental well being and mood, they also took pleasure in watching birds, observing bird behavior, listening to bird song, attracting specific species of birds, including colorful or rare species. And they like said quite frequently that bird feeding is a source of entertainment. An example from the second person I ever interviewed, they said a quote that says, bird feeding brings nature to you, to your porch, backyard, or balcony, and you are able to witness that firsthand. Many participants also reported that bird feeding had helped them engage socially with others, like I said previously with the COVID pandemic. What I found was similar to previous findings in other people's research, which was good. Participants actively encouraged other people to feed wild birds and felt a sense of belonging within the bird feeding community. One person said, I think bird feeding is a social thing. You go to Wild Birds Unlimited and everybody talks about bird feeding. There's friendships and connections that are made through this hobby, which really warmed my heart hearing that. Participants perceived bird feeding as a beneficial for both wild birds and themselves, and they took pride in providing birds with food and habitat on their properties. Some participants believed that feeding is especially helpful to birds during the winter when food is scarce and temperatures are low. And some people refer to the negative impacts of habitat degradation and urbanization on wildlife when explaining why they feed birds. A lot of people said this surprisingly during the interviews. They said that many participants supported birds by volunteering for conservation efforts, engaging in gardening groups, local nature related groups, and even national environmental organizations. So people were not limited to their feeding activities. They were very involved with environmental causes and protecting the environment in their local area and even national level. To talk first about the first group that I created, the enthusiastic feeder. Again, these are going to be all characteristics of each category, but remember the individual, these are just generalizations, and each individual, of course, varies slightly within each group. No one individual fits perfectly into one group. And also, I do want to say this since this is presentation with laypersons, we don't want to look at something as bad or good. We just look at, oh, this is different from how other people think. So you might see yourself in some groups and not with others, or might look negatively at it, but that's not what we try to do. We just try to understand and meet where people are and understand their values and motivations for their bird feeding behaviors. So, with that said, the enthusiastic feeder is motivated to support bird welfare. That's their main motivation. They anthropomorphize, which means they give people birds animal or human characteristics, and they might even talk to the birds sometimes too. So they adopt a parental perspective towards birds. They even see birds as part of their families. I heard a lot of people talk to them as if they were little children, or they had to care for them, they mothered them. I heard some people saying, oh, that bird is so and so, he comes every morning at this time. So it's part of their routine, a part of their family as well. I put some quotes from the interviews directly on here that you guys can read for yourself as well. The enthusiastic feeder is very aware of the consequences of bird feeding. So they understand the importance of disinfecting bird feeders to prevent pathogen transmission to wild birds. The enthusiastic feeder doesn't necessarily need somebody telling them this. They are very so into bird feeding that they take the initiative to research online, talk with other birders, and they found this out themselves through their own interest and passion through the hobby, which I thought was very interesting. They have a strong level of responsibility because they understand the consequences. So they have a strong obligation to mitigate these risks, and they are very distressed by seeing sick or dead birds at their feeder. They expressed a lot of negative emotions and felt things like sadness, anger, and guilt. Their behaviors, so they did focus on disease preventions. These are going to be the people that not only disinfect their bird feeders, but their bird baths and their bird houses. And they are routinely disinfecting using disinfectants like vinegar, bleach, or soap. Some people even cleaned their bird feeders more often than biweekly. This one interviewee said that everyone's told me you can spread disease if you don't clean your bird feeders. And that seems to be consistent with what I found on the web. It is true that you can spread disease if you don't keep your feeders clean. On the top right, this is what one interviewee sent me. They did say that the process for cleaning, because the enthusiastic feeder didn't have one feeder, they had like 20. So they did say it was a very time consuming process, but they didn't mind it if it was to protect the birds and make sure that they're happy, healthy, and safe. So instead of complaining about it, they actually tried to make little tricks to make it a faster process. So they created their own bird feeder cleaning kit of sort, where they would have soaking buckets at the ready, they would have scrubbing brushes and the bleach outside. There was a whole setup. A lot of enthusiastic feeders tend to have this kind of setup in their houses, and a lot of them didn't have just feeders out being held with food and things like that. They had extra replacement bird feeders so that if the process took a really long time and they couldn't get it done all at once, they had replacement feeders that were already clean that they could put out while they were cleaning the dirty ones, so that the birds could constantly be feeding and be with food. The well-intentioned feeder, they view feeding as a way of environmental stewardship. So they understand that people are cutting down forests, taking away habitat for the birds. So the well-intentioned feeder says, "Hey, I'm going to bird feed because I want to support the birds and help them, especially during hard times like migrations." So they generally understand that cleaning bird feeders helps the birds in some way, but they don't necessarily know the specifics about the kinds of diseases that can be spread or the best way to clean the bird feeder. They tend to link disease with outbreaks rather than something that is continuously happening. They have a strong obligation to feed birds responsibly, and seeing a sick bird increases their understanding. It's so like a eureka aha moment. So they understand the importance of cleaning bird feeders when they have an experience with a sick bird. Like the enthusiastic feeder, they tend to have negative emotions associated with seeing sick or dead birds. They associate also dirtiness with a lot of disease. So the bird feeder, if it has a lot of fecal matter like poop or the bird seed is soiled and wet, they're like, okay, I need to clean it. But they only tend to clean when it's visually dirty, and they don't clean regularly. As a group as a whole, their cleaning frequency and methods vary. They tend to clean more regularly when they hear of a disease outbreak. They are concerned about certain disinfectants harming bird health. They did mention specifically that using soap for hummingbird feeders might hurt them, and they were also worried that bleach might leave a residue for the solid food bird feeders. Like the enthusiastic feeder, they were concerned about time and effort, but they didn't tend to clean as regularly as the previous group because they don't know too much about the diseases or the best way to clean the feeders. The last group, I do think that the name has a negative connotation, but I couldn't think of a better word to call it. So they're the self-interested feeders. They're more focused on bird feeding for their own personal pleasure because it complements their hobbies. So just to give an example, people who are really into photography or taking videos, or people that are really invested in creating a super long life list and getting as many species on eBird as they can, these are going to be your self-interested feeders because it helps them feel personal pleasure and they enjoy it themselves, rather than, the well-intentioned feeder did it to protect birds from habitat degradation and supporting them during hard times, and the enthusiastic feeder did it for bird welfare. So their motivations differ, and they don't really recognize the disease risks of backyard bird feeding. Like the well-intentioned feeder, they do link disease with outbreaks, but they do not think that disease is something to worry about because they consider it a natural part of life. For their level of responsibility, they don't really have a moral obligation to regularly disinfect bird feeders. And a lot of them noted to me personally that they don't believe that their individual actions can have a huge impact on the bird population as a whole. So they're like, oh, even if my bird feeder is spreading diseases, my neighbor never cleans his feeder, so why should I? It was that kind of thinking that they used to validate their behaviors, justify their behaviors. And so they didn't really clean or disinfect their bird feeders regularly. The few people from this category that did report cleaning, they only did it if they heard of a severe disease outbreak, but then they quickly reverted back to their habit of not cleaning feeders. They are concerned about the time and effort it takes to clean bird feeders, especially if they're bird feeding for their own personal pleasure over bird welfare. And they also had, as we discussed previously, low risk perceptions related to disease. This is kind of just a table. I helped to organize all the three groups and their differences and similarities to see how, just to show you all of the writing on one slide. I coded the number of times people mentioned certain diseases. From the interviews, people seem to be most familiar with the Finch eye disease, Mycoplasma conjunctivitis. And I do believe from the interviews that people tended to reference this disease the most frequently because it's the most visual. In human dimensions, we like to say out of mind, out of sight. So if you don't see birds that might be asymptomatic or they don't look bad at your feeder, you're not going to know that it's diseased, correct? But with Finch eye disease, it's very visual, right? They have the crusty eyes, it's swollen. Sometimes they can't fly right because they can't see well. So it does make sense that the Finch eye disease was the most referred to disease. The second most popular was salmonella and avian flu. During the time that I was interviewing, the egg shortages were going on and starting to rise up. So I think people were hearing on the news a lot more about avian flu and salmonella. I also coded people's sources of information about not only bird feeding, but bird cleaning and diseases. A lot of people reported having gotten their information from national bird organizations, things like Wild Birds Unlimited. Birds Georgia was one of them. That was one of the top sources of information. And some other people got their information from other people. So this would be if they talked to somebody at a bird club or just the neighbor, and people tended to pass on information through a game of telephone for information about diseases and how to bird feed. So what do we do with all this information? Well, we want to provide people accessible, consistent information on what pathogens can be spread from bird feeding and how to properly disinfect backyard bird feeders. Across all of the groups that I interviewed, people said that there was a lot of contradictions online when they were searching on how to best disinfect a bird feeder. There was a lot of hearsay. And so we want to provide that consistent information saying this is the way that people should do it and educate people on that. And we do want to clarify that disinfectants like bleach and soap are safe to use and will not harm bird health. So we want to overcome those constraints where people were like, I don't know if I should use soap or bleach, it might hurt them. So we want to work with Georgia DNR to say that it is safe to use and bleach will evaporate and it will not harm the birds after using it. We also want to address constraints. I'm going to delve into this in the next couple of slides, so I'll go over this quickly. But we want to follow by example from the enthusiastic feeder group and create bird feeding kits that decrease the time and effort to disinfect bird feeders. Lastly, we want to collaborate with birding and social groups to alter risk perceptions about disease risks. We want to emphasize that bird feeding, disinfecting bird feeders can protect bird health, and individual actions do matter to mitigate disease risks, and they can make a positive impact on the health of bird populations as a whole. Also, we want to create norms. If other people know that their neighbors and their friends and the people in their Audubon Society are cleaning their feeders, they may be more inclined to clean their feeders to themselves. So, nudges is a form of choice architecture. Choice architecture refers to the intentional design of how choices are presented to individuals to influence their decisions, and this is called nudging. And it is done in such a way so it doesn't compromise their freedom of choice. So I put some examples up here. So if we look at the recycling bins, that incentivizes people to recycle because it's already separated in separate bins for you. You don't have to find a recycling bin, it's already there next to the trash can. And even the little holes to shape it, they can tell you, oh no, this only holds a bottle, this can only have paper in it. So that's an example of nudging and choice architecture. Another example is that cartoon on the bottom. People tend to only pick what's at their eye level because it's easiest to grab. People don't tend to pick stuff on the higher shelf or on the lower shelf because it's more effort. People are naturally a lazy species, so we do whatever is easiest for us, such as this example here on the left-hand side, cutting corners, even though when there's a perfectly good sidewalk right over there, that was poor choice architecture. If the designers designed the sidewalk so that it goes around the natural in the shortest distance from one point to another, they wouldn't be having this problem. The reason that we need choice architecture and nudges is so that we can prevent things like people taking pictures so close to bears or feeding the animals when they're not supposed to at a national park or hugging the buffalo at Yellowstone, right? So, while choice architecture is most commonly associated in behavioral economics, there's been previous studies that applied nudges to engage people in pro environmental behaviors. So, we want to apply this concept to our own study. And the way that we're going to do it is take example from the enthusiastic feeders, create bird feeder cleaning kits to reduce the time it takes to clean the bird feeders. And we want to create reminders, work with environmental and birding organizations to create reminders on social media to clean their bird feeders biweekly. And we want to increase people's awareness level about disease is a continuous threat. You shouldn't be cleaning your bird feeders only during outbreaks. It should be a constant thing because it's easier to prevent a disease outbreak than react to one. And this is a nice image up here. People tend to do what others do. As what I said earlier, people follow the leader. So if we get more and more people cleaning their feeders regularly, others will feel morally obligated to follow suit. I'm just going to go over this really briefly. These are very, very preliminary results. I haven't even showed my boss these yet, but as you guys might have seen and taken this survey, I thank you so much for doing this. Um, what I did was I administered the survey this year from March 7th to March 31st, and I disseminated the survey to all sorts of nature related organizations and birding clubs. And I asked them to share on their social media, their listservs, and people took this survey with a QR link or a survey link, and we used messaging to encourage people to also share the survey to others who meet the eligibility requirements. So I asked people their cleaning behaviors as well as their motivations, similar to the interviews, but we wanted to quantify those results in actual numbers and percentages that we understand. So here are the statistics from the survey. People tended to have their bird feeders seasonally, which totally makes sense. And people with solid feeders, it was between almost every day and every day of the year were the most popular answers. Again, solid feeders are anything with like actual seed inside, whereas liquid is the hummingbird feeder because it's just nectar. I asked people how knowledgeable they think they are about cleaning a feeder properly, out of 0 to 10, with 10 being the most knowledgeable. So as you can see, most people thought they were pretty knowledgeable about cleaning a bird feeder. And then I hit them with, do they clean their bird feeder? The majority said yes, which was great to hear. Um, and I asked people to select their top 3 reasons for cleaning their bird feeders. And number 1 was preventing the spread of diseases, which is great to hear because that's what we want, right? The second one was seeing dirt or debris in the feeder. So we assume that there's a lot of well-intentioned feeders in this group. And then the the third biggest group was seeing moldy or sprouted seeds in the feeder. So when there's bad weather, the seeds tend to sprout. So cleaning that. We asked how often people clean their feeders. For the hummingbird feeders, the majority said weekly, which is awesome. For the solid feeders, there's a whole mix of answers. Though the majority was the monthly, we still have a lot of people reporting in all the other categories as well. So we aim to encourage people to clean bi-weekly, but this is not the case currently based on the surveys. And I asked them what kind of product they use to disinfect their feeders. Red is going to be bleach, no disinfectant at all, so just plain water is going to be that dark yellow. Other cleaning solution, this would be like a non-bleached chlorine-esque product that they listed. Most people said that they use soap, that's going to be the blue, and then vinegar or a natural disinfectant would be purple. And I, in the survey, reported how people should properly clean a bird feeder based on the recommendation from the CDC. And then I was like, are you willing to do the recommended method? And a lot of people said that they probably would, which is good. So people are willing to do the right thing. Um, this is a little confusing because I couldn't put it all on the slide, but if people said that they did not clean their feeder whatsoever, I did ask them why not. And people said remembering to clean was the biggest barrier for not cleaning their feeders whatsoever. On the right-hand side of the slide, if they did report cleaning, I asked them, well, what impacts you from cleaning your bird feeder regularly? And a lot of people said, remembering to clean and the time. So implementing those bird feeder cleaning kits would be super useful. One of my last questions was I asked respondents how much of a risk they think their bird feeding is spreading diseases to the following groups of people and animals. As you can see in the red and dark yellow, a lot of people don't think that diseases are spreading to any of these groups of people or wildlife. So they have low risk perceptions about diseases. So even though people are willing to clean, and do the recommended method, they don't think it's necessary to because they don't think the threat of disease is very high, as we can see from this graph, which is very interesting. I didn't expect to find that. So as far as next steps go for me, I'm going to finish analyzing my survey, and GOS, Georgia Ornithological Society, gave me some funds to create the bird feeder cleaning kits. I'm going to do some outreach programs in Northern Virginia or Northern Georgia and test the effectiveness of these kits on people's cleaning behaviors. With all of that information, I'm going to gather feedback and adjust the messaging and send all these resources to Georgia DNR so that they can implement them in real time. Thank you guys so much for attending this. I am super happy that you guys came to listen. If you guys would be so kind as to scan this QR code to fill out a short little survey about feedback. This goes directly to my boss for her performance review at the end of the year. So that would help her a lot. And I also provided resources on cleaning bird feeders. Some of them are articles, but some of them are just really good websites that I found if you want to take a look further. And thank you again. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat or the Q&A now. Winkler, who is a very active member with us, Nicole, I recognize his name. He just left a comment, just being surveyed by you increased his feeder cleaning frequency and carefulness. So he says thanks.
Oh, that's great to hear. How wonderful. Yeah, and if anybody has any actual questions about salmonella or disease prevalence at their bird feeders, my coworker under the same grant, Kimberly Perez, I'm more than happy to get you guys connected to. She knows all about the diseases, the symptoms, and how prevalent certain diseases are in certain species of backyard birds. So she does a lot of that kind of stuff, more so than the human dimensions.
So you have one question came in, well, two. I'll read them to you both. What would you propose to be in the cleaning kit? And how often should someone clean suet cages?
All right, that's a great question. For the suet cages, we still recommend the biweekly method. If it's a cage, they said that there was this one study, it's on here under my more resources on cleaning bird feeders, but they said that cleaning debris off actually does so much help with decreasing and mitigating disease risks rather than just letting it soak. So the actual like scrubbing motion on feeders is super important. And with suet, the fat sticks on there like crazy. It's super slimy and all of that after, the birds get through the suet. So I do recommend bi-weekly for that. I just finished purchasing all of the bird feeder cleaning kits. So what I have in there is Dawn dish soap, bleach, as well as this is all in a 5 gallon Home Depot bucket, by the way. I have a replacement feeder because, like I mentioned, the enthusiastic feeder had replacement feeders to put up while they were cleaning, and that helped with the process. I got those water bottle tube scrubbers. They were all different sizes so that, especially for a hummingbird feeder, you can get into those little flower shaped holes. And then I also had latex gloves. I know that I am aware that some people do not like bleach because it splashes on their clothes or they're allergic to it. So latex gloves will hopefully help relieve some of those worries. So that's what I have in my bird feeding cleaning kit, as well as an infographic and a brochure on how to clean step by step. But I'm planning to survey people who receive the kit, and we're going to add stuff based on what people, with the feedback that they're giving me.
And then by bi-weekly, do you mean twice a week or once every other week?
The latter, once every 2 weeks for solid feeders. And there's not a lot of information about hummingbird feeders, but they recommend daily depending on the weather. So that usually equals out to 2 to 5 days.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely that's true of hummingbird feeders, especially if it's like hot, a really hot, humid day. You definitely want to be taking those in sooner than later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you can help it, try to clean outside. You don't want to be cleaning bird feeders in the same sink or kitchen area that you guys eat and touch the same surfaces. Always wash your hands, of course, after cleaning a bird feeder, but I know some people like to use their dishwasher to clean their bird feeders, and I do want to say that just be careful with that because you are washing it in the same area as where you eat and that can help spread salmonella.
And then someone had asked with the Dawn soap that you mentioned in your kit, is it regular Dawn or like a specific, like one of the newer formulas?
Just the regular Dawn. Um, I Dawn dish soap is what we use back in the lab, so that's what we use. Any wildlife safe, friendly Dawn just happens to come to mind. It's such a popular brand.
Any other questions at this time? Oh, okay. So someone asked, bleach comes in different strengths. What strength bleach do you make the 10% bleach?
As in the well, I if you're going to use like Clorox, for example, it's just they do it, it's not very scientific, but they say 1 part bleach to every 9 parts water. And I do understand that there are different strengths. There has not, we have yet to have a study testing the different types of strengths on bird feeder, like the pathogens on the bird feeder. And I was just at an international conference last week in Atlanta, and we were talking about that very thing, how there's a need to do a study on that because even though we are telling people in the public to clean their bird feeders a certain way, we do know that there are so much different varieties of cleaning products. So right now it's just bleach, but I wish I could be more specific.
Perhaps not industrial bleach, but maybe, just our regular household bleach, I would probably assume is fine. Yeah, like you said,
Yeah,
Clorox.
Clorox is definitely fine. Animal shelters use it. I have used it for volunteering with wildlife before. So as long as you have it diluted and then you rinse it with water after, it should be fine. Um, Bleach, if there is any residue, if let's say you forgot to rinse it off with water after, bleach is going to evaporate off the surfaces and it'll still be safe to use for the birds. It won't harm them in any way.
All right. Any other last questions? Thank you again, Nicole. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. If you joined us late and you missed the beginning or some part of it, I did mention that we will be recording this. So check your emails in a few days for that recording. It'll be a YouTube link. And if you have any questions or maybe you want some of those resources that Nicole had mentioned, please feel free to reach out to her. Her contact info is there, or me, anyone in Burge, Georgia. We can get you in touch and get those resources back to you. Thank you again, guys. Have a great night. Thanks again, Nicole.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Happy birding, everyone. Have a good weekend.